On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Kirill is going to break the bank. So let's count those pennies, eh?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will take a look at what we could be facing with a potential Kirill Kaprizov extension. We'll look at the pros, the cons, how much money will be in the general area for, and what it means for the salary cap from 2026 and beyond. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and top of the list in terms of things that now are in front and center for the Minnesota Wild is what is going to happen with Kirill Kaprizov. He's entering into the final year of his deal. He sounds like he wants to stick around. In his end of season media availability, he said he likes it in Minnesota, and he is hoping that everything works itself out as far as a long-term deal goes. But we know it's not going to be cheap. It is likely going to put him amongst the highest paid players in the NHL, and there are ramifications for that. So I wanted to just talk it all out here on today's show, throw you some numbers, look at where Kaprizov's surplus value was at, and kind of what this means for the cap, because the 2026-2027 cap numbers and beyond are interesting to look at. So let's start by just looking at Kirill Kaprizov, the player. We know what Kirill is when he's on the ice, when he's cooking, when he is in full Kirill Kaprizov mode. He's one of the best players in the NHL. Since he came into the league back in 2020, 2021, Kirill Kaprizov is tied with Nathan MacKinnon. Think about that. He's tied with Nathan MacKinnon for goals with 185. He's played in 319 games. MacKinnon has played in 369. He is just ahead of Chris Kreider, Sebastian Aho. He's ahead of Sidney Crosby in that same stretch. Steven Stamkos, Jake Gensel, Zach Hyman, Jason Robertson, Tage Thompson, you name it. And all these players have played more games in that span than Kirill Kaprizov has. So Kaprizov is a prolific goal scorer. And you look at his average 82-game season, he's averaging 48 goals per 82 games played. Let me say that again. He's averaging 48 goals per 82 games played. Now, we'll talk about getting to 82 games in segment 2, because that has been a little bit of a concern. You could throw that into the cons part of the equation, but routinely, Kirill Kaprizov is the leader in basically every statistical category for the Minnesota Wild. Shots on goal, offense, defense, you name it. And Kaprizov is at the top of the list. And I thought it was really interesting, in just 41 games this year, he still had more of an impact than many of the regulars in the lineup did throughout the course of the season. Kaprizov, despite only playing 41 games, finished third on the team in points with 56. He finished second on the team in goals with 25. Again, despite only playing 41 games, the only two players that had more points played all 82 games in Marco Rossi and Matt Boldy. Beyond that, he was on the list as far as he was up at the top of the list in every statistical category, and was arguably having his best season before the injury. You look at where his statistics landed through the early part of the season. His shooting percentage was a career high, was tied for a career high with his rookie season, 17.2%. He had 145 shots on goal through the first 41 games, which if you average that out to the full 82, that's 290 shots on goal, which would have far and away led the team, and that also would have been a career high for him as well. He was playing a career high in minutes on the ice. The only area in which the numbers were kind of had dipped was the power play. You know, he was on pace for 8 power play goals after having no fewer than 14 the last 3 seasons combined. So that was really the only dip, but his even strength goals, the scoring was substantially up. He would have finished with 42, assuming 82 games played. But still, he was on track for a career high in even strength goals, career low in penalty minutes. He was a plus 19 through the first 41 games of the season. And this did include a stretch in which the production started to kind of tail off a tad. Through the first 26 games of the season, Kirill had 42 points. He was tied with Martin Necas for the league lead. Now, the 17 goals that he had in that span was a little further down the list. He was tied with William Nylander and Cole Caulfield for 4th. But you're talking about a guy who was playing so well that he was getting a lot of consideration for the Hart Trophy. And from that December 9th date in which he had played 26 games, if you go from December 10th to the end of the season, we see a little bit of a dip, and I think that coincides with what he was dealing with in the injury department. If you look at Kaprizov's numbers through the last little bit of the games that he played, which was 15 games, he did end up with 14 points, 8 goals and 6 assists, but we're talking about a guy through the first 26 games of the season was averaging 1.6 points per game. So there was a little bit of a dip, but all told, Kirill was on pace for arguably his best season ever. We were thinking that he was going to be the first 50-goal scorer in Minnesota Wild history. And he finished on pace for that with 25 goals in 41 games. Now, I think a big reason for that was the fact that he had a healthy offseason, which I think he will, for the most part, have this year. The 2 years ago, he went into the offseason injured and was trying to work his way back from that. Took him forever to kind of shake that off. And then he finally did. And he was great down the stretch. But the early part of the season 2 years ago was a struggle. This year, got off to just a torrid start, as did the Minnesota Wild. And then additional injury woes kind of took over, and the rest was history. But when Kirill Kaprizov is firing at all cylinders, he is one of the few players that the Wild have that commands the puck. Now, there was and it wasn't exactly a scientific exercise from a statistics standpoint, but Jay Fresh on X, who is pretty deep in the analytic world amongst hockey Twitter, put out a table showing miles skated per game and correlated it with the amount of things that a player was doing on the ice to try to kind of sift out, like, okay, these are the cardio boys. the guys that are just skating out there and not doing anything. Then there are some players that don't skate, do a ton. So trying to kind of correlate that for player metrics, and Kirill Kaprizov, far and away the leader for the Minnesota Wild in terms of the amount of time he skates, the amount of skating he does on the ice, and the amount of individual elements that he contributes to scoring goals, winning games. And it should be a surprise to no one. Many Wild players fell into the waiting for the puck category. Now, for centers, you'd kind of expect that. Joel Eriksson Ek, a net front guy, he's going to do most of his heavy lifting right in front of the net. Marcus Foligno, same thing. But there were other players too who fell into that category of just, not doing a ton. And so this is, I think, a big reason that the Wild rely so heavily on Kirill Kaprizov's skill set, is because he is so active. He is so mobile in the zone. He constantly draws in the attention of the opponents. And when their eyes are on him, that creates opportunities for line mates, for teammates to step in and do their thing. But that kind of take charge and score a goal when you need one is there quite often for Kirill Kaprizov, which is why, as one of the premier players, he's one of the face of the franchise types in the NHL right now. He is no doubt the face of the Minnesota Wild. And with that, there comes a price. So making him one of the highest paid, if not the highest paid player in the NHL right now. I say right now because this is just like quarterbacks in the NFL. Your guy is going to be the highest paid for a little bit, but then every subsequent extension after that is going to reset the market. And this is the price of having a player of that caliber, is if you want to keep him around, you got to pay top dollar to keep him. Now, that's not to say that it's just a slam dunk, that Kirill Kaprizov carries no questions. There's no risk associated with that contract, because of course there is. So coming up after the break, we are going to talk about just some of the concerns with him. Granted, it's a small list, but there are still some concerns, and what that type of contract does to your books. We'll talk about all that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios, and I got to tell you, one of the greatest snacks there is, because I no longer have to feel guilty about having just handful after handful of Wonderful Pistachios. I was watching the Minnesota Timberwolves take care of business against the Golden State Warriors on my couch. Got a little hungry, and as has been my custom since I stumbled upon Wonderful Pistachios, I always have a bag on hand. I got a couple handfuls into the honey roasted no shell, which is my go-to variety. And I thought to myself, I don't have to worry about this, because each serving gives you over 10% of your daily value of protein. So you're eating something that tastes good. You're also getting great daily nutritional value. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We're going to take a look at potential extensions here for the next few episodes. Just going to run through everybody that we want to sign to an extension. I'm not going to devote time to those that we have already said goodbye to. But I'm going to do a Rossi episode. I'll do a Gustafsson episode as well, because one of the things that I kind of want to do this off season is just like be a GM, run through the off-season simulation and see what we can make happen. And I will do that, of course, with the latest version of NHL. I think it's 2K25 now. We'll do that with the latest version, and we'll see what we come up with. I'll run you through kind of what we get for different things, trades and such, and we'll see what sort of a team we can build here throughout the offseason. But so we talked about the pros. Kirill Kaprizov's one of the face of the franchise type players in the NHL. Since he came into the league, he's been a borderline top 10 goal scorer. He is a dynamic playmaker. He is a game breaker for this Minnesota Wild team, and the way the Minnesota Wild are structured, he is the guy because he is one of the more mobile players on this team as far as what he does on the ice. All largely attractive things that Kirill brings to the table. There are some questions, and it starts with that 41 games. Playing 50% of the games this year. He played in 75 last year out of a possible 82. And I'm going to put this out there every time we talk about like what constitutes a healthy season. With the rigors of an NHL season, I'm not going to get super bothered if players miss, single digits worth of games. Like if you play in the mid 70s as far as games go, everybody for the most part needs a day off here and there. Unless you just absolutely refuse to come off the ice. Hockey players miss games usually for pretty legitimate reasons. So if a player plays 75 games and is mostly healthy, you're not going to get a huge amount of concern out of me. But 2022, 2023, when Kaprizov played in 67 games, he missed a large chunk of games after that awkward tangle up with Logan Stanley. And then in the postseason that year, he was a frequent target of former Minnesota Wild defenseman Ryan Suter with cross checks to the lower back, tightened that up and basically turned him into a shell of himself. Now the lower back stuff doesn't concern me as much as a couple of the recent injuries that he has been dealing with do. Notably, and we don't even necessarily know if these are the injuries because nothing ever gets confirmed. We just are going with what we believe to be the case. But that season, getting tangled up with Logan Stanley, likely did a number on Kirill Kaprizov's groin muscle, which he never recovered from that season. Started off slow in 2023, 2024. This season, whether it be a full groin tear or a sports hernia or whatever it is, requiring full surgery and time missed during the regular season. So there is some injury concern with Kirill Kaprizov heading into what will be his next deal. And you have that with varying degrees. Kirill Kaprizov's a very intense player on the ice. He is going to give you everything that he has, but there is a noticeable difference when he is not operating at 100% or even at like 75%. So if the surgery that he had during the season cleaned up whichever of the two that injury was during the year, then he should be healthy going into the off season. But those types of injuries, especially the groin muscle pulls or tears, are susceptible to re-injury. So if that is indeed what is going on, again, good luck confirming it. If that is indeed what's going on, then you run the risk of having that flare up again, whether it be a strain or a tear. And even if it's a strain or a pull, that's not a short timetable from an injury standpoint, because that's one of the muscles that you really need to push, to push off with your legs and kind of get going from 0 to 60 when you're on the ice. And if you don't have the ability to do that, that can have some ramifications going forward. So there is an injury concern element to Kirill Kaprizov's new deal, should he choose to accept it here. So that's something that you have to live with here with what he brings on the ice. And you just have to hope that he can bounce back and get you into the 70-ish games played this season. Maybe even get back to 80. When he is going full tilt too, he really isn't afraid to be physical. He's not afraid to jump into the play and throw his body weight around. But obviously, if he's not feeling 100%, his ability to do that is going to drop. So injuries probably the biggest concern for where he's at right now. Again, there aren't a ton of concerns beyond that, because if you look at how his game has evolved since he came into the league, when he came into the league, he was pretty much a shooting, like an offense type player that didn't give you a ton of value in the way of defense. In 41 games, he had a 1.8 defensive point shares. So if you extrapolate that over 82 games, that would almost double his previous career high on the defensive side to 3.6. And he was on pace for a total point shares of 14.8, which would have been also a career high. So he's starting to add a little bit. And look, I'm not by any means suggesting that he's one of the better defensive players in the league. I'm just telling you, he's starting to be able to not be like a full liability on that side of the ice. And depending on who his center is, if you have a center that's capable of playing a full two-way game, then you're fine. You're in business. The other concern that I have about the contract, and we'll talk more about this after the break as well, but just looking at what that percentage of the cap is going to do to the Minnesota Wild's ability to fill out a full roster. Now, the Minnesota Wild can offer more money than anybody else because they have the edge on re-signing Kaprizov, because they are the team that he came into the league with. They have the ability to go above and beyond what anybody else on the free agent market can offer. So if he wants money, Minnesota is going to be able to beat anybody else. The key is going to be who gives him the best chance to win a cup. Can the Wild become that? Or will someone else be able to do a better job or get him closer to that promised land? Well, that's certainly a good question to discuss. We will debate that as we look at just the roster building that would go along with Kirill Kaprizov's extension. So we'll plug in the numbers as well as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. A reminder as well, our next live show with Denny will be Monday night, continuing the theme of Are the Minnesota Wild in a Full-Out Crisis, and a continued look into Bill Guerin's moves since he took over as general manager. So that's coming up for you on Monday night, 8 p.m. You know the drill. You know the spot. 8 p.m. right here on YouTube. So make sure to join us for the next live show coming up on Monday night. So let's just look at this a little bit. we'll take a look at what Spotrac has to say, because I just feel like they do a little better job of laying things out than Cap Friendly does. But we know the Minnesota Wild have roughly $18 million of cap space available this offseason. Have you seen the number that is potentially available for next year, for 2026, 2027? Because I think that might be the one to keep an eye on for the team building. The Minnesota Wild for 2026, 2027 have 12 contracts out of the 23-man roster. They are currently sitting with $46.9 million in cap space. That's assuming a couple of things. That's assuming a salary cap elevation to roughly $104 million. That takes into effect the active cap, the dead cap of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. Potential bonuses also factored into that mix as well. There's a lot more of the team to build for 2026, 2027. But let's take a look at some of the names that come off the books that season. Obviously, Matt Zuccarello, who has widely speculated that this will be his final year in the NHL. He'll be off the books come 2026, 2027. Zach Bogosian will be off the books come 2027 as well. Vinny Hinostroza. Basically, the only players that will be Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek, Marcus Foligno. Ryan Hartman will be in the final year of his deal. Yakov Trenyan, Freddie Gaudreau, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Jake Middleton, Zeev Boyum, and Brock Faber. Philip Gustafson will be an unrestricted free agent at that point. So that is going to eat into some of that money if the Wild choose to extend Philip Gustafson, which I think they should. And obviously you've got Jesper Wallstedt in the mix, but Spotrac has his number already in. So I like that. So they've already factored Jesper in. But if you look at the percentage of the cap, Kirill Kaprizov right now is at 9.4% of the cap with his $9 million salary. So let's assume a $104 million salary cap. Let's just assume that is the that's what we're dealing with for that upcoming season. Now, I've seen everything from $14 to $15 million for Kirill Kaprizov for his next deal, putting him in that upper echelon as far as average annual value goes. Let's just say I want to keep the math easy for this. So let's just say $15 million. And we take 15 million divided by 104 million. That is 14% of the cap. 14.4% of the cap to be exact. That's a lot to allocate to one player. Now, how many players is Kirill Kaprizov worth is another good question because of what he does on the ice. You could say he is so far above average that he is worth, 1.5 to maybe 2 players. The Athletic did their report cards for the season, and Kirill Kaprizov had the highest net rating of anybody in the Central Division, having only played 41 games. He was on pace, obviously, for 112 points. His expected goals for the season was 44. He was on pace for 50. His current salary is 9. His market value, $14.9 million. Based off of his production, they projected that he could go on the open market and get 14.9. So even just using 15 as like a starting point, you're pretty much right at what would be expected for Kaprizov to get on the open market. But the big key is going to be the big key that you have to ask yourself in any of these situations is it better to overpay for a franchise superstar, or is it better to take the PR hit and utilize that $15 million elsewhere. In the case of the Minnesota Wild, because of how much of the offense runs through him and how much of the offense doesn't work when he's out of the lineup, I think it's a situation that the Wild really don't have a choice, regardless of the type of player he is. I don't think they have a choice in this matter. This team is currently, with him on the roster, this team is one that, you know, they draw in national eyes. The NHL wants to get him on national TV because he is a player that puts butts in the seats. You take that away from Minnesota, Matt Boldy's a good player, Brock Faber's a good player, but they aren't franchise cornerstones. There's a reason that Kirill Kaprizov, in the 5 years that he's played, has shattered basically every record that exists for the Minnesota Wild. You think about it. The Wild had never had a 100-point player before Kirill Kaprizov got here. They had a handful of 30-goal scorers in their history. They had a couple of 40-goal scorers in their history. Kirill has basically taken every record that exists because it took forever to achieve those records because the Wild, after Marian Gaborik, had nobody in that spot. Mikko Koivu ended up being the franchise icon through longevity. I don't have anything against Mikko Koivu as a player. He was miscast. He was not a number one center. He was a defensive center that on a playoff team is probably a strong defensive face-off specialist in like a second or a third line role. I don't feel like that's even a controversial statement at this point. But the fact that he was the best that the Wild had, the most marketable, all those records being there because of sheer longevity, should tell you everything you need to know. So the Minnesota Twins got to this point with Joe Mauer. Every Minnesota sports team has gotten to this point when they come across one of these generational talents. You have to weigh whether it makes more sense for you to overpay to keep them or to try to figure it out after they leave and go elsewhere. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think given how much Craig Leopold loves what Kirill Kaprizov does and wants him to stay, if Bill Guerin fails to get this done, I think we'll be looking at a new GM who comes in to try to figure out what to do next. So it's going to be in the $15 million range. It's going to probably be an 8-year deal. So there obviously are concerns at the back end of that deal, what that looks like. But you just got to hope that Kirill Kaprizov can stay healthy, can avoid any additional major injuries. And if he does, if there's anybody that has a chance to make a deal like that look like a bargain, it's Kaprizov. And then the question immediately shifts to, what does the rest of the roster look like? And this is where the notion of roster optimization comes into play, because you need to make sure when you have a player that is making that much money, you need to make sure that the rest, every spot on the roster counts. Every spot up and down the roster has to be giving you something and giving you some level of production. And if you don't get that, well, that's the difference between advancing in the postseason and finding yourself on the outside looking in. So let me know in the comments, what do you think the Kirill Kaprizov extension would look like? Do you think it's going to be 8 years? Do you think it's going to be in the $15 million per year range? And what is your biggest concern regarding Kirill Kaprizov if he were to re-up here in Minnesota? Let me know in the comments. Let's get that discussion going here as we move through the second round of the playoffs. And they've been chaotic. They've been great. It's been fun to just kind of kick back and take it all in. So appreciate everybody tuning in here to today's episode. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We'll take a look at a Philip Gustafson extension for tomorrow's episode. So make sure to tune in then. Until we see you for our next episode, make sure to keep it right here to Locked On Wild. We'll keep you up to date on all things Minnesota Wild all offseason long, with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.